Hi class, welcome to lecture 4.4, Stocks and Their Value Part 2. Now this is another lecture that also goes over chapter 9 in the book. Now, unlike the previous chapter where I went through every slide, what I'm going to do here for you is really just focus on a few key slides. So you might see me flip through some of these slides really fast, but my reason for that is I know that your time is limited, and there's some repeat material in here that I think you might be able to use, such as a lot of extra examples about the dividend growth model. But let me focus on some of the conceptual stuff you might see on an exam. Now you've noticed I've skipped all the way to the fifth slide here. What I really want you to understand about intrinsic value is just this idea that a stock's real price is something that you can get out there and look up on Google using, Yahoo Finance or Morningstar or the Bloomberg terminals, the Bloomberg Lab, whatnot. You can look it up, and that's what it actually is. But what it should be is probably closer to the intrinsic value. That's what we would calculate, right? So, if we're going to assume that these, should be equal in equilibrium, we can actually use that assumption to determine whether or not we have a buy opportunity or sell opportunity. More specifically, stocks with a price below its intrinsic value, okay, they're going to be considered undervalued. And if they're above the intrinsic value, then that stock's going to be considered overvalued. Okay, hopefully that makes sense. Now, what determines stock's intrinsic value versus its market price? Well, there's a couple things, and this is a nice little diagram here that kind of maps it out for you. What you'll notice is it's really all about cash flows and risk. For the stock's intrinsic value, we're going to use true information. And for the stock's market price, that's all going to be perceived estimates, right? And so the difference there is going to tell you whether or not there's a buying opportunity or a selling opportunity, because in a market equilibrium, you would expect the intrinsic value and the stock price to be equal. Now, if you've tuned in at all and watched this lecture, then here's your big reward. This slide might be on the exam. Okay. I can see a very good, easy listing question here. There's some different approaches for estimating intrinsic value, and if you take future finance classes, you're going to learn how to do some of these. I just want you to know the basic definitions here. We're really only going to learn the discounted dividend model, but there's obviously a couple of other ways you could do it. Those ways include the corporate valuation model, a PE multiple approach. There's other multiples as well, and then there's the economic value added approach. Now, if you look here on slide 8, we get into this discounted dividend model. I'm going to skip this. You can work through this. So slides 8 through about 27 are all the dividend growth model type questions, and you've seen that from the previous lecture 4.3. So if you want to work through those problems on your own, please do so. But I'm going to jump down to something new on slide 28. So now we're looking at the corporate valuation model. You don't have to know how to do this, okay? But what I want you to know is it's sometimes called the free cash flow model or the free cash flow method. And so if you see it on an exam, make sure that you have that in your mind, okay? And basically, it's a similar idea. The dividend discount model or growth model, looks at future dividend cash flows, kind of discounts them back. Here we're going to discount back to the present value all of a firm's future free cash flows. Okay, how do you find free cash flow? Well, you're going to use the equation there, and that gets back into some stuff that we talked about all the way in exam 1. So how exactly do we apply this model? Well, the first thing you're going to do is you're going to find the market value of the firm. Okay, you find it once again by finding the present value of those firms' future free cash flows. You're going to subtract that market value of the firm's debt and preferred stock to get the market value of common stock. Now, say that again. Well, if you think about the right side of a balance sheet, if you need to get common stock, you could take the total value of a firm and then subtract off its debt and its preferred stock, and all that's going to be left is common stock, right? Now, if you've got the market value of the common stock, then you're just going to divide that number by the number of shares outstanding, and voila, you've got the intrinsic stock price. Okay? So that's kind of the short and dirty explanation of how you get intrinsic value using the free cash flow method. Now, why would we use this? Well, one of the most obvious reasons is there's a lot of firms out there that don't even pay dividends, right? So if you've got a company that's a growth company, doesn't want to pay any dividends or whatnot, the dividend growth model is not going to work very well. But the free cash flow model could. And it's going to work similar to the dividend discount model or growth model because it's going to have an assumption that at some point the free cash flow will grow at a constant rate. Just like with the dividend model, you're just going to assume that dividends are going to grow at a constant rate. And then this term horizon value is simply going to represent the value of the firm at the point that growth becomes constant. So if you go back and look at some of those two-stage dividend problems, we would always we'd look at what happened in the future first, and we kind of use the dividend growth model to get to maybe like a P5 or a P4, and then we would discount back to P0 based on that area of maybe no growth or no dividends or crazy dividend payment history. Well, the horizon value is going to be like that P4, P5. It's going to be that moment in time where at this point forward all the growth becomes constant for the free cash flows. For example, here's a timeline showing you exactly what I'm talking about. Here you're going to have a couple cash flows for the first 3 years, and then you're going to have a regular free cash flow method problem from 4 on. So you find P4, you add it in with your other cash flows, and voila, there you go. You can find the intrinsic value. Right? Well, it's a little bit more complicated than that. What you found here is really just the market value. Remember that there's a little bit of an extra step here. So if that 416.94 number is really just the market value in terms of millions of a firm, then you want to remember find the market value of equity. So you're going to take that 416.94, subtract off the 40 million that they're telling you that's here for debt. It gets you to this 376.94 million. Then you got to divide that by the number of shares outstanding, right? So if there's 10 million shares outstanding, what you're going to end up with is $37.69 per share. Okay, so there's the intrinsic value per share. Now, you don't have to do the math for this exam, but just remember that for the future, especially for your future investment classes. Now, with the firm multiples method, I want you to know that PE is used quite a bit, but you also see price to cash flow and price to sales used as well. These other two are sometimes used when earnings are when a company's going through a period of bad earnings. If a company just starts off, for example, it might not have a really good earnings history, and but you expect it to have a much higher earnings down the road. So maybe you want to look at its sales, right? Because it might have a lot of upfront cost, but it should still have some sales, and so you might want to go ahead and look at that. So price to sales could be important for that's just one example. So how would you go about doing this? Well, looking at similar firms, you're going to estimate what would be a good PE, and then you're going to multiply by whatever if what's ever in the denominator. So if you did PE or price to cash flow, price to sales, then you just multiply by that, right? And you're going to basically back out or figure out the price by almost back solving your way out of these multiples. So that'd be another way to get a quick price. Finally, I want to mention the economic value added approach. Here you've got equity capital times ROE minus cost of equity. Now that may sound somewhat confusing, so let me kind of rephrase this. In corporate finance, the EVA is simply an estimate of a firm's economic profit. In other words, it is the value created in excess of the required return of the company's investors, right? Their ROE, minus the cost of equity, and multiplying this times the equity capital is just another way of saying that. So quite simply, economic value added is the profit earned by the firm less the costs of financing the firm's capital. Now, I've seen several other formulas for economic value added. So you don't, I'm not necessarily asking you to memorize this or even know that. Just know that it's another one of the approaches. You might actually come across several other types of formulas down the road. And there's probably endless adjustments that could be made. I know that there's a handful of adjustments that are made quite often. And in a lot of ways, we're just really looking at another way of defining profit. And one of the reasons we might want to do this is because we may be trying to get away from maybe some like dubious accounting adjustments that have enabled some companies in the past, like say an Enron, to report profits while actually approaching insolvency. Now, if you want to find the value per share, what you're going to have to do is first get the market value of equity, and this is going to be the book value of equity plus the present value of all future economic value added. Okay, so once you get the market value of equity, then you'll have to divide that obviously by the number of shares outstanding, and voila, now you have your intrinsic value based on the EVA approach. So those are the four different models or approaches that I want you to know about, because there might be a question like that on your exam. Another likely question on the exam could have to deal with preferred stock. So what is preferred stock? Well, preferred stock is not technically a bond, but it doesn't act really like a stock either. It's more kind of a hybrid in between. Like bonds, preferred stocks are going to get a fixed payment, but theirs is going to be called a dividend instead of a coupon payment. And like bonds, they're going to get paid before a common stockholder does, but they're not going to get paid before debt holders. And although I might have said that preferred stock get a guaranteed payment, it's not necessarily guaranteed. It's guaranteed that they'll get paid before common stockholders, but maybe nobody gets paid, right? So they can omit a preferred dividend payment, for example, if they're afraid the company may go into bankruptcy. But usually they're going to try to meet their preferred stock requirements, and then they're also going to try to pay dividends to common shareholders if that's something that they'd like to do. Now, with this final slide, all I really want you to understand is preferred stock often acts like a perpetuity, right? So this is very much like the dividend growth model, except consider G equal to 0. So what you end up with is just D over R. Okay, so if a preferred stock with an annual dividend of $5 sells for $50, what is the preferred stock's expected return? You're just going to do $50 for the value or the price of that preferred stock, and then the dividend's going to be $5. So what would you do? Well, you're going to take that $5 divided by $50, and bingo, you got 10%, right? So that right there tells you that your expected return on this preferred stock is 10%. Okay, I told you I try to keep it short. Those are the major points that I want you to have taken away from Lecture 4.4, Stocks and Their Value, Part 2. There are a couple other slides in there that give you additional practice and teach you some of the same stuff that I went over in 4.3. By all means, go through it, but I wanted to zero in for you on what I thought would be additional new material that you might need to conceptually understand for Exam 4. If you've got any questions, please let me know. Thank you.